Hello and welcome to today's video, which is on tritone subs for dummies, where I'll be looking at what a tritone is, how to find one, and how you might go about using one in a chord progression. So first, let's have a look at what a tritone is. So a tritone consists of 6 semitones. So for example, a tritone above B would be F. We simply count up 6 semitones. The tritone is considered to be one of the most dissonant intervals and resides within the dominant 7th chord. So a dominant 7th chord is built on the 5th degree of the major scale. So if we're in the key of C major, that would be G. So we simply stack a major third, a minor third, and another minor third. This forms our dominant chord. The B and the F form a tritone. The B wants to resolve up to the C, and the F wants to resolve down to the E. This is what makes a dominant 7th chord pull so strongly to the tonic. So a tritone substitution is essentially where we replace a 5-7 chord within a chord progression with another dominant chord which shares the same tritone interval as that 5-7 chord. And it's most used in chord progressions of a 2, 5, 7, 1. So how do we go about finding that other dominant chord which is going to share the same tritone interval as our 5-7 chord? Well, essentially all you need to do is go up a tritone from the root tone of your dominant 7th chord. And you can do that either just by counting up 6 semitones, a tritone, or you can look at the circle of fifths. For example, if we were wanting to identify the tritone substitute for a G7 dominant chord, we would simply draw a line across the circle of fifths from G to the opposite side of the circle, where we end up at D flat. So both G and D flat are a tritone apart, and their dominant chords both share a common tritone of a B and an F. So there are two types of tritone substitutions. One type is vertical replacement, which is most common, and another type is horizontal extension. So in vertical replacement, we essentially completely replace a dominant 7th chord in a chord progression with another dominant chord that shares the same tritone interval. So in order to figure this out, we can go back to our circle of fifths, and directly opposite G on the circle of fifths is D flat, as we previously established. So we could insert a D flat 7 chord in place of a G7 chord, which would result in a new chord progression of D minor, D flat 7, C. So instead of a usual D minor, G7, and C, we would exchange the G7 with the D flat 7, so it's D minor, D flat 7, C. Horizontal extension is where we can harmonically extend the tension within a chord progression by adding another tritone substitute dominant 7th chord to the progression. With the chord progression D minor, G7, and C, this could look like adding the dominant chord of G, which would be D7, before the G7 chord to increase the tension. D minor, D7, G7, and then C. However, we can take this one step further and do a tritone substitution of this D7. We could identify the tritone substitute of D7 using our circle of fifths and going opposite the circle, which brings us to A flat. So A flat would be our dominant 7th chord that we could insert into our chord progression before the G. So it becomes D minor, A flat 7, G7, C. So instead of D minor, D7, G7, and then C, we can exchange it so that it's D minor, A flat 7, G7, and C. And you could also replace the G7 with D flat 7. If you'd like to check out some more complicated examples of tritone substitutions where they've been used in songs, you can check out any of these and see if you can identify where the tritone subs are happening. That's all for today's video, so thank you very much for watching.